Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan. In this video I'd like to express my appreciation of a young man called Tom Harwood. For those who've never heard of him, and I hadn't myself until a couple of days ago, Tom is a 25-year-old journalist currently working for GB News, and I know that he's said things both on TV and on social media recently that have somewhat frustrated many people I respect. But as far as I'm concerned, Tom is a gift. Let me give you a wee taste.
Where people were saying boys shouldn't go to girls' schools. Well, transgender women aren't boys. In schools and in prisons and situations like that, there are many people who would be absolutely out of whack at a boys' school, who should absolutely be going to a girls' school, who would be indistinguishable for you and I. And that's when someone talks to someone who identifies as female, who is, for example, a transgender woman, and who calls that person a man. I think that's a very rude thing to do. And I think it is rude to call transgender women boys.
An abusive thing is you talking to trans people, to trans women, and calling them men. It's the most extraordinary and quite frankly rude, extraordinary position to be taking. It's one that most people in this country would find quite abhorrent. I can only assume that you don't have any trans friends, that you've never met anyone who is trans. In that way, I think that was needlessly provocative and quite frankly rude.
Oh, how provocative and quite frankly rude of people not to kowtow to misogyny. Pass me the smelling salts. Those clips were from two exchanges that appeared on GB News yesterday. They are on YouTube and I'll link below. What we have here is a representative of the polite and principled wing of the gender nutters movement. Sorry, I'm never going to be representative of the polite wing of the gender critical movement. I'll leave that to the likes of Kathleen Stock and who else is there? J.K. Rowling. Tom may be the only member of that wing on the other side, but I, for one, appreciate someone who doesn't get abusive at people when they disagree with his ridiculous views. And I'm not talking about while he's working. Obviously, he's not going to be hurling nasty epithets at people on TV. But I checked his Twitter timeline, and compared to that odious plank Owen Jones, who is on the same side of this debate as Tom, he comes across as a gentleman. One of those old-fashioned gentlemen that barely knows what a woman is, let alone gives a toss about our erasure as a sex class, and can't see why women and girls shouldn't act as shields for fragile men and boys with mental health conditions. Before I lay into him anymore, I do want to give credit where it's due. This feels like ancient history now, but here he is tweeting his outrage at the case of Lindsay Shepherd at Wilfrid Laurier University. Information about this case is easily found online. What I remember at the time was hordes of wokists tweeting their disapproval, their criticisms of a woman for showing students a couple of clips of a debate involving Jordan Peterson talking about pronouns or something. It was ridiculous. And here, alone amongst the genderists, so far as I know, he is making the obvious point about the police contacting my friend Margaret Nelson, who was age 74 at the time, for writing something really innocuous and scientifically accurate on her blog that had offended either a trans person or ally. If I remember rightly, the police later apologised and admitted they'd been wrong to take it seriously. So kudos to Tom for that. It shows he's a man of principle, even if those principles don't extend to women's rights to keep spaces single-sex in the face of men who claim to be women. When it comes to his arguments for the transgender cause, there really isn't anything to debunk. His assertions are ridiculous. He talks of trans children. Tom, there is no such thing. Every male-born child is a boy. Every female-born child is a girl. The fact that some children are incredibly unhappy being what they are does not make them something else. You must surely be aware of the evidence that most children and teenagers grow out of that unhappiness and come to terms with their sex. Gender ideology has become fashionable and is being seized on by children going through the normal but unpleasant feelings that often come with adolescence as a possible solution to their problems, to their anxiety or depression, even more so when they come from a background of abuse or neglect or are neuroatypical. Have you read Kira Bell's account of what led to her transition? It wasn't gender dysphoria. You said trans women aren't boys, so why are you calling them trans? What is it that makes male people women or girls? If you answer that it's because they are unhappy being boys or they like so-called girly things, that is deeply offensive to those of us who are women. Womanhood is not a refugee camp for unhappy men. And while I understand that the demands and expectations and requirements placed on men will, in some of them, cause profound distress, that doesn't make them women by default. You were asked by Calvin to define what a male is. Your answer was...
I think a male is someone who is perceived by society as a man. If I was walking down a street and I'd never met someone before and I looked at them and I say hello, I'd likely say hello sir if they looked like a bloke, and I'd say hello miss if they look like...
So it's not about feelings, it's about other people's perception. Is the butch woman who is frequently mistaken for a man then? Of course she isn't. You must realise how preposterous that line of argument is. Okay, I've had my rant. I'll try to represent what Tom said fairly. He asserted that a blanket ban on admitting boys to girls' schools is insane, and he argued that applications from boys who claim to be girls, what he calls trans girls, should be treated on a case-by-case basis. And in support of this assertion, he claimed that some of these boys are indistinguishable from girls. What? I'm sorry, Tom, but I don't think you've really thought this through. If you have, and you still think that, you may be certifiably insane. That is an extraordinary claim, and the onus is on you to support it, to provide your reasoning. I haven't seen you do that. Both the people Tom was pitted against yesterday, first it was Kelly J. Keane, then Calvin Klein, no, sorry, not Calvin Klein, Calvin Robinson. Both of them did an awesome job in defending women's rights. But the arguments from them, as well as from his co-presenters and many respondents on Twitter about girls' feelings and safety and sex differences and all the rest of it, fell on deaf ears. He relied heavily on argumentum ad populum. He showed a couple of YouGov polls to support his claim that arguments in favour of preserving women's boundaries and hanging on to women's rights were out of step with what the majority of the country want. This survey of fewer than 1,700 people is about allowing trans-identifying men into various women's spaces like toilets and changing rooms and refuges. In no case did a majority of those polled vote in favour of admitting them. Around a quarter of those polled declined to say yes or no, so if you add them to the people who specifically voted against admittance, we can say that a majority did not vote in favour of admitting trans-identifying men to women's spaces. And something that Tom omitted to mention was that this question was only about post-operative men, that is, men who've had genital surgery. And we see the same pattern in this poll asking whether a trans woman is a woman and a trans man a man. It's a bit of a stretch to claim something definitive about the majority of the UK population based on those polls, but even if it was a genuine majority view, that doesn't make it right. But my favourite thing of all that Tom said was this.
Making a blanket restriction there. They're not treating this as an individualist situation. They're being particularly unconservative about this, if you really want to go that far. They're rejecting a view of people as individuals.
Unconservative. So the correct conservative position is to allow for the possibility that some men can be women because everyone's an individual, right? I don't quite follow the reasoning, but who cares? Tom, who has a Wikipedia page, has an impeccable conservative pedigree. He is, in fact, one of many conservatives who are in thrall to the baloney that is gender ideology, and he serves to make the claim that gender nonsense is progressive and the prerogative of the left look all the more absurd. So, thank you, Tom. Keep up the good work. And that's all. Thanks for watching. Bye.